Welcome back to another wonderful day of Ottoman history. We are going to be speaking about the Ottoman Palace, which is the nerve center of the empire, and specifically that one that is built in Constantinople, um, which is still standing today and functioned as the main palace until about 1850. So from 1450 to 1850, this was the center of government. As we pointed out initially, many people in the Ottoman Empire did not want Istanbul to become the capital. Constantinople was a sort of infidel city. They wanted not to be associated with the Roman Empire, etc. They wanted to keep the capital in Edirne, but Mehmed II reinvented the capital, put it in Constantinople, and set out to build large portions of it. There was actually an initial moment in which the first palace was built in Constantinople immediately after the conquest in 1453, but it was quickly decided that it was too small. They needed a new one, a better one, a more interesting one, and that is when they built Topkapi Saray. Topkapi is the name of the palace. Saray is palace. Topkapi literally means cannon gate. It was finished in 1478, and it is on the edge of this historical peninsula. Here it actually overlooks a wide variety of other spaces, so you can see out to the sea, to different parts of the Sea of Marmara. And you can already see in this very early map by the 1480s that there is a palace structure here built over there. And if you were to look at it from the sea, and you can see actually also the walls here, by the way. So you have actually heavy gardens, even what looks like horsemen running out in here. Over here is Hagia Sophia. You have different other pieces and the overall walls in general in Constantinople. So it's basically built on the edges, on top of certain Byzantine monuments. But this is what it looks like today if you were to see it. So you can still see actually large portions of the gardens surrounding it. And really you have to think of this place as essentially a tiny city. There would have been 40 to 50,000, 40 to 10,000, 4,000 to 10,000 people just inside, living, working in this giant complex. Of course, not everyone lived inside the palace, but maybe sometimes in the city, but they would come in and work in it. And just in terms of janissaries that were living there, there's at least 1,000, and that was on top of all the other people working as falconers, as gardeners, as cooks, etc. Many of which were recruited again through slavery in the first two centuries, kind of between 1400 and 1600. Almost all the people drawn from this are from the so-called devshirme or penchik, and trained and developed in the palace, including the women folk. One of the interesting things is that if you were to look at this palace today, you might not recognize it as a palace because it's actually a sort of whole different collection of buildings set in 3 successive courtyards, right? Each courtyard becomes more and more exclusive and offers a different level of access. Interestingly, these courtyards are not symmetrical. You can actually kind of look at them as this is the first courtyard, and there's the second courtyard, the third courtyard, and then the harem. So they don't actually, they move off in diagonals. And this is in some ways perhaps reminiscent of Mongol and Turkish nomadic kind of palace cities, in which what you have is actually a set of pavilions set up as tents in an encampment, and you move from place to place, each one getting more exclusive than the others. So what you have the same thing, but now in a built environment in masonry structure. The most important part, the part where the Sultan usually was hanging out, was the harem, which is over here. This third courtyard was where all the treasury and all the kind of internal government material was going on. This is where the pages who were going to be future administrators were trained. This second courtyard where the soldiers were interacting, and this is over here the divan where they were moving into. And the third courtyard is again other buildings, kitchens, all sorts of things. There's also kitchens over here, all sorts of other material. out in this. And in fact, if we can look at it a bit more closely, we would see something like this, right? So first courtyard, anyone could kind of basically, if they had business in the palace, get into, try to present themselves at the first courtyard. You only got into the second courtyard if you had business with the divan. In the divan, this is where all the actual government would occur. The ministers would sit there and discuss matters of state. If you wanted to present a petition, there were certain days, I think 2 days a week, where you could come in and present. Anyone could technically present a petition to the government. This also functioned as the appeals court from the Islamic courts as well. So if you wanted to appeal a decision, you could drag yourself all the way to Istanbul, if you didn't live in Istanbul already, and present yourself in front of the divan, which we'll get into in more detail in a second. Again, here's some stables. Over here on the other side, there's a bunch of barracks. But the second court is where most people would stop. If you were lucky enough to actually meet the Sultan, you would not meet them in the divan. You would meet them in this audience chamber, the throne room, which is situated between the second and the third courtyards. And this would be maybe the one and only time you would interact with the Sultan. But for the most part, most people never saw the Sultan in person, ever. To the degree that Sultan was moving anywhere, he would be in this third courtyard, or usually more commonly, especially after kind of 1550, 1600, in this harem area, in the kind of personal family quarters. The women folk and so forth would be, which again, everyone was a slave, because the sultans did not get married. They only had children via concubines. Everyone was in this harem space, though that, as we'll see, that didn't stop them and the women folk from having a lot of political pull in the politics of the people of the time. And then there's a variety of all sorts of different other spaces and other areas. There's a treasury room. There's eventually a library here. There's a whole bunch of other stuff in this. I highly recommend that you go check out Topkapi Palace if you can. One of the interesting things that when I was doing research there, the staff told me about a delegation from Russia. The Senate of Russia came, and the head of the Senate took a tour of Topkapi Palace and said at the end, after 2.5 hours of walking through it, said, this is all very nice, but when are we going to get to the actual palace? Of course, not understanding that they had been in the palace all along, because this person imagined that the palace that they were in, a palace should be a kind of large single structure rather than a set of structures pieced together through courtyards. In any case, this is the first gate. This is the gate that you would try to get through, if the first monumental gate. This is why they call the Ottoman government the port, because it's a series of gates that you have to cross in order to get closer and closer to the government. But the very first one you have to get through is this one, with this massive, amazing calligraphic inscription on the top. And here's another one, all dedicating the moment when it was built. You got through this, you made your way eventually over like half a kilometer to this second gate, where you would try to convince the guards to let you in and present your business. Again, massive inscriptions on this side. And if you got through here, you would get into the second courtyard, which would look like this. And then you would enter into this space to present, actually over here, to present your business to the divan. As you can see, there's also a tower here. This isn't the original tower. The original tower apparently was a wooden structure, but burnt down somewhere in the 1700s. But there was a high tower. This was the so-called Tower of Justice, symbolized the kind of Sultan's all-seeing eye, the fact that he could kind of peer across the city, and therefore symbolically ensure that justice was going on. This was an important idea, the fact that the Sultan, while never seen, was always keeping an eye on things. In fact, there's a lot of stories, popular stories, about how the Sultan would go out in disguise, incognito, at night, through the city of Istanbul to ensure that order was being maintained. So what happened in this divan, this area right here? This is where people would present their business at the court, and you can kind of see it in this miniature, which tries to depict the second courtyard. And you can see there's janissaries here, there's guys bringing food, pages bringing food, all sorts of other business going on. And this area, in this divan, is where the actual business of state, this is where a few different people would meet. You would have the what's called the Beylerbeys or Beglerbey, the sort of chief generals of Rumelia province and Anatolia province. So that is the kind of the European and Asian sides of the empire. Then you had also the chief military judges of those two sides. You had treasurers, you had the Grand Vizier, you had sometimes the Sheikhul Islam, the Chief Justice, and probably the Chief Admiral, and a few other figures who would be there, and they would listen to anyone presenting a petition, any sort of formal event of government that they needed to deal with. Then they would have orders made, etc. So basically someone would be like, like I'm being harassed by this guy who's trying to steal my land. If he couldn't get justice locally, he would show up to this, and then an order would be made and then sent out to remedy this. The Sultan would never actually be present in this room. The whole point is that this is dealt with by ministers, including the Grand Vizier, who's kind of the prime minister. The Sultan instead would look out from a window onto the events in this room. The idea is that he would never actually be seen. This is the room this is what the actual divan room looks like now. You can see very nice tiling from the period 16th, 17th century. He was supposed to be he could be behind this window, this barred window with a curtain. You never knew if he was there. Again, the idea is that just his presence, his possible presence, was meant to keep people in line and to ensure justice done through the ministers. So the ministers would sit down here, people would present various stuff, and you would actually the business of government would occur in this place. These are European depictions of the same space, by the way. Again, you can see the window over here, and you can even see a sort of shadow figure, which is supposed to represent, the Sultan possibly peering in over to the proceedings. In this case, you have a delegation of Europeans of unknown origin, probably Dutch, or because this is a Dutch painter. And you have a variety of other figures, ministers, people. Probably the people sitting are the ones making the decisions. The ones standing are other figures. And a certain point, this is also where they would eat. So they would also sit there, have different events. This is also an interesting depiction of the events here. Here's again the window, the Sultan looking over into this space. But what this is, by the way, the detail of this little mini part. But what we have here is actually a set of interconnected images depicting the actual commissioning of this manuscript, in which the Sultan this is the Tower of Justice, the Sultan is overlooking the proceedings, the ministers sit and say, well, we really need a history, what's called the Shahnameh of Sultan Salim, which is kind of like late 16th century. They get together, they meet, they think about what they want, etc. And then this is worked out by the artisans who are there's a calligrapher and a painter and a chronicler, etc., and they're going to do this. As you can see here, this is probably the order or a petition being read out. All of this is going together in different ways. As always, point out, look at their headgear. Headgear can tell you a lot of different things about the status of the person. There's a little hat in the turban, which is what gives it structure. So the turban is actually made beforehand, and then you put it on your head like a hat. Check out the Sultan's turban, which has all this flare or bling or other things into it, feathers and jewels and things like that stuck into it. Now, there are starting around the 1500s, under the period of Sultan Suleiman, there are kind of three branches of government. One is called the Sayfiya, the men of the sword. Saif is sword. This is basically the military, the governors, etc. The head of them is the Grand Vizier, who is sometimes called Sadr al-Azam. He's the one who's in charge of the government itself. He's the one leading the proceedings of the divan, of the actual court. He is basically in charge of the day-to-day governance. He's the prime minister, whereas the sultan is the monarch who does a variety of other things. Okay, then on top of that, there's a bunch of bureaucrats, right? You can't run a gigantic empire without a lot of paperwork. Those people doing that paperwork are part of the Kalemiya, or the people of the pen. They are led initially by a chancellor, the head of the chancery, and then the finance minister, what's called a defterdar. But then eventually, by the 16th century, late 16th century, there emerges another figure called the Rais ul-Kutab, the chief secretary, in which a variety, who is basically in charge of running this massive bureaucracy, which will eventually extend to thousands, if not tens of thousands, of clerks and bureaucrats and scribes, all tasked with basically keeping financial and governmental order in the empire. By the way, on the left is a picture of the Imperial Council meeting with the petitioners. This includes women, children, brought in all sorts of people, non-Muslims, Muslims, everyone coming to present their grievance or request. Petitions are read out loud. On occasion, there's the janissary, the head of the janissaries, who's going to also be there to maintain order. If necessary, this guy will take the pen out of his pen holder and write a order. But it's, in other words, a basic functioning form of government, just like any. The last part of the government is called the ilmiya, the kind of religious hierarchy, the men of sciences, ilm. And this is led by a figure known as the Shaykh ul-Islam, probably this guy over here, with the kind of big round turban. He is basically the chief legal opinion and religious figure of the empire. All of these figures, by the way, are constantly appointed and reappointed in different times. The usual tenure is about a few years, sometimes a few months. The whole point is not to let any one person get too much power, and there's always a great deal of jockeying back and forth. By the way, a lot of these people are also executed at the end of their tenure because they run into problems with different factions. So what we have is the Sultan at the head of the empire/dynasty, but he's not directly involved in day-to-day governing. Instead, there is, again, the Sadr Azam, the Grand Vizier, seen here. He's the deputy of the Sultan. He's the one who's actually doing the governing. Then below him, there's 3 to 6 viziers or ministers. Then we have a governor, the different governors, head of the navy, basically military people. We have the 2 chief judges, military judges of the askari class, 1 to 4 treasurers, a chancellor, and the head of janissaries. These are all the official members on top of the other figures there. Now, what happened though when you needed to go deeper into the palace, and you needed to go into the 3rd courtyard? At this point, you got to this gate. This gate was controlled by the chief white eunuch. Right now, you're entering into the private realm. So you're moving away from the public, the place where the divan is, where people could present their grievances, to the private realm, the sultan, and that's why it's controlled by a eunuch. That eunuch, this is the white eunuch's realm. And the moment you come through, there would be a sort of throne room, which looks like this from the other side, which you can see kind of here. Around this courtyard, the 3rd courtyard, is a whole variety of different buildings. But in this throne room is where audiences would be made. with the Sultan. So after the Divan meeting, the ministers would then go and meet the Sultan himself in the throne room, kind of, and update him about what happened. On occasion, there were moments when there would be some sort of formal event. You can see the throne, by the way, is not like a normal throne of what we would think from Europe. It's kind of like a raised dais where he would sit cross-legged or sit down in different ways. On occasion, there would also be ambassadors from neighboring places, such as this one, the ambassador from the Safavids presenting himself to the Sultan. In this case, he would often, anyone presenting the Sultan would be held by the arms and kind of made to prostrate themselves in front of the Sultan while in the presence of the various ministers, the Grand Vizier, etc., etc. And in the process of presenting themselves, they would drag along all the different gifts and material that they would bring to the space. Once you got past the third courtyard, there was another area called the harem. The harem connected both into the second and third courtyards, but basically no one came in this place except for the women folk and the Sultan and the children of the women folk. Again, most of the people, almost everyone here is recruited through slavery, including the women serving, the concubines, and Queen Mother. This place is controlled by the chief black eunuch. It's quite large. That guy is called the Kislar Ase, the lord of the women. Within that, he and his deputies, he would have like 10 to 20 sub-eunuchs, controlled the kind of actual functioning of this area, whereas the Queen Mother, that is whoever was the Sultan's mom, current Sultan's mom, was the most powerful woman figure in there. She controlled everything else. And then on top of it, there was the Hasaki, the favorite concubine of the Sultan. She also had a specific role. Okay. Now, eventually, over the 1500s, 1600s, the Sultan became less and less seen in public. And in fact, he basically stayed entirely in the harem. And also, before they became Sultan, they would spend their entire life in this harem area. And so that meant is that less and less people saw the Sultan, and so the people who had the most control and contact with them were often the Queen Mother, the favorite concubine, and the chief black eunuch. And that's why these people ended up becoming super, super powerful. By the way, there was only one or possibly two cases of sultans marrying after kind of the first few sultans. Sultans didn't get married, they just had children with concubines. Though there were rare exceptions, including Roxalana or Hurrem Sultan, a former slave from Ruthenia, which is basically Ukraine, who Sultan Suleiman fell so deeply in love with that they had multiple children, and he actually got married to her, but that was rare. I do want to point out one last thing. Again, we talked about the chief black eunuch, extremely powerful figure, especially in the 17th and 18th century. Most of these people, again, received through slavery, recruited initially, captured as children in the area of Sudan and the Horn of Africa, brought up to Cairo, where basically Coptic or Christian doctors would castrate them. If they survived, they would then be sold on, eventually enter palace service or the service of various people, dignitaries. And the best part, of course, is the best ones were sent to the imperial palace. And if they made their way up the rank, they could become chief black eunuch, where they would serve for a while until retiring. They would often retire to Cairo, but they're incredibly powerful. One of the things you can see, actually, if you look in this photo drawing of the eunuchs and the audience chamber here, the Sultan is here at the top, but the second highest person is the chief black eunuch, and you can see all of his sub-eunuchs. You can see actually just how much detail is, if you were to look in this photo, how much detail is actually put into their faces. You can actually differentiate all of them, especially compared to the chief white eunuchs here, who control the gate between the second and third courtyard. This is the Sultan's sword bearer and wine cup bearer, etc. So you have a variety of other servants, a few other servants in here as well. We're going to skip this, but basically the court was also functioning in different ways. While on the move, sometimes the Sultan would go on campaign, in which case they would set up a mobile court through tents, very fancy tents, on outside of the palace. So I will leave it at that.